We welcome back to the program former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is with us. You know, Mr. Secretary, the last 3 or 4 times, including I believe it was last week when you were on the show, I've been asking you 3 very, very specific questions. 1, about Russia and Ukraine. 2, post-Olympics with China and Taiwan. And 3, it seems like we have an answer on this. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Biden and Iran are on the verge of resuming that failed Obama nuclear deal. And an unholy alliance between China, Russia, and Iran. Okay, one of the 3 you predicted right is coming true. How bad do you predict this will be?
Well, Sean, it's going to be absolutely tragic for the Ukrainian people, really bad for Eastern Europe, and cause real problems for the United States in the long run as well. It's very clear Vladimir Putin never intended to negotiate when he felt like he had a set of Western leaders that weren't going to do the things that would impose real cost on it. This is the effort we had for 4 years. It was peace through strength. It was a strong U.S. military and very candid conversations about the things that mattered. We'd work with anyone. We'd work with the Russians if it made sense. But Putin clearly has demonstrated he has no interest in talking with President Biden. You could see, right? You could see when we didn't sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, when we sent our diplomats home from Kyiv, when we didn't put any sanctions on him in advance, when it was very clear he was teeing up what we're seeing unfold in the coming hours and days. I think he saw that he had a weak partner. He saw Afghanistan or a weak adversary when he saw Afghanistan too. I think these were green lights. And when President Biden spoke about a minor incursion, well, that minor incursion has just taken place, and I think it's going to end up being significantly more than that.
Am I wrong in believing that the separatists will ask for assistance from Mother Russia and Vladimir in terms of hostilities they have with the rest of Ukraine, and that will then be the pretext for Putin to perhaps march all the way through Ukraine?
Seems quite likely. They'll certainly be the call, and there'll be some casus belli that Putin will make something up. Look, in the first instance, we have to put the blame where this falls. This falls with Vladimir Putin. He is the aggressor. The Ukrainians are the victims. We should never shy away from that. But the West could have done so much more. Instead of providing piecemeal, small, too-late weapon systems, we could have provided real capability for the Ukrainians to defend themselves in a serious way. So I think they'll fight, but I think in the end, the Russian army can take what it wants. It won't surprise me to watch the Russians move at least through parts of Ukraine that cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea or the Sea of Azov. That seems like a likely course of action and will be enormously destructive for Eastern Europe. And make no mistake, as you were talking before, Sean, Xi Jinping is watching this. Chairman Kim is watching this. The Ayatollah is watching this. They're all watching to see how the West responds to an incursion into a Western country that sits in Eastern Europe that wanted nothing more than to try and build out its own nation.
One of the key things that you mentioned was Nord Stream 2, and the Trump administration prevented that waiver from ever being given to Vladimir Putin. In my view, that was basically taking our Western European allies, and the lifeblood of their economies is energy, oil, and gas. And it was making a hostile regime, Russia, with a hostile actor, Putin, rich again. That also helps enable him to do something like this financially. But more importantly, it makes them more reliant on Vladimir for their own economies, which then weakens any ability they might have, members of NATO might have, our Western European partners might have in negotiating or really standing strong against them in an impactful way.
Sean, let's watch. I think that's exactly right. Let's watch. Let's see if Germany actually will do what the German country needs to do to defend its European partners and friends. They've become incredibly dependent on this gas. We would not have let that happen. We wouldn't have let that pipeline be completed. But, Sean, remember, too, when President Biden shuts down American energy, American LNG, American petroleum from being exported to support these European countries, they are weaker and Russia benefits. And make no mistake about it, not only do we have higher gas prices at home, but the cost of energy around the world has increased, and the beneficiary of that is Vladimir Putin. As you said, he has the money and the wealth now to sustain a campaign in a way he wouldn't have if crude oil was at 53 or 63 instead of what it's at today, 92.
Well, 43, and maybe lower. Now that
yes, sir.
There are some economists predicting it could go as high as $150 a barrel, which means expect another $1.50 more a gallon that you'll be paying. That we might be seeing $6 and $7 gasoline at some point. What Biden's announcement of limited sanctions targeting the two republics seems very weak and ineffective. I agree with your analysis about Germany. Germany is right in the center of making Putin rich again, and their dependence on his energy supplies are severe. So I don't see them able or capable of doing anything.
I hope they'll do better than that, but my fear is exactly what yours is with respect to how Germany will respond. They'll say, well, it's just two little provinces of Ukraine, right? They'll justify what Putin has done, violating the sovereignty of an independent nation. Your point about the sanctions that President Biden announced today, it's way too little and massively too late. And will have absolutely no impact on how Vladimir Putin assesses his cost and his risk of continuing his effort. It was really odd for them to come out and say that these two places where there aren't very many Western companies doing significant business. It was odd to say, well, we're going to sanction those two little places while Vladimir Putin is continuing to build out his massive capacity, not only to invade in those two places at the request of those leaders, as you described. It's farcical, and to think that those sanctions are going to have any change in behavior is silly on silly.
We watched this troop buildup. We watched the military buildup. It's been going on, I guess, since October, and now up to anywhere between 150 and 190,000 troops estimated. All this military gear, literally tanks 2 miles from the Ukrainian border. And Joe Biden's response was, we're going to send 3,000 troops to Europe, and we put 8,500 troops on a heightened state of preparedness, but we're not going to get in a shooting war with Russia. But we're going to go after him with sanctions. Okay, sanctions targeted to two Ukraine republics. If I'm Vladimir Putin, to me, it's humiliating and embarrassing because there's nothing that he's going to do that's going to have any impact on Putin's decision making, and I don't really think NATO knows what to do.
Hey, Sean, nothing I've seen from this administration so far has altered this desire that Vladimir Putin's had for so long, right, which is to begin to build out his near abroad and recreate the former Soviet Union, right, which in his mind is something that they are rightfully entitled to. I saw his remarks today. I saw Putin's remarks today. I mean, he rewrote history in its entirety, talking about Ukraine as being properly part of Russia. That's just not the way it has all actually gone over the last decades. And it requires the West, NATO, Europe, the United States, to push back against the story, the narrative. And when he was building up, we should have begun to do the things, arming the Ukrainians, giving them the capacity to defend themselves in a way that would have told Putin, I probably can still be successful, but it's going to be really costly and really dangerous. And we're going to have lots of Russian lives, lots of Russian body bags coming back. And it might have changed his calculus. I can tell you that we had deterrence for 4 years. The only thing that's changed, Putin didn't change, Sean. Putin's the same guy he was during our time. What changed was American leadership.
What do you tell Americans that say, why should we give a flying rip what Russia does to Ukraine? Ukraine's got their own massive corruption issues.
There's multiple reasons. One is we have an obligation to help every country that wants to defend itself from aggression and force retaking their nation. I wish we'd do that our own southern border in a serious way. This administration hasn't proven willing to do that either, but we certainly ought to do that for other peoples that want to do it. Second, fertilizer costs, the cost of bread and wheat, the cost of energy will all increase as we let this guy, Vladimir Putin, roam about Eastern Europe. So there's a deep history. There's a deep connectivity to those.
What do you make of his revisionism history in terms of this has always been Russian territory?
Yeah, it's the storyline he has to tell himself in order to justify the behavior that's taking place. He said for the weeks, I'm not going to invade. Well, now he's essentially saying, I'm not invading. I'm just reclaiming what was properly Russia's. It is fanciful. It is not reflective of the reality of history, but it's the story he tells the world. And frankly, there'll be people in the United States that buy the story, that somehow blame the Ukrainians for this aggression. This is Vladimir Putin's war of choice. We could have done more to deter him, and now we need to continue to do things that raise the cost to Vladimir Putin without any need to risk an American life.
When I last had you on and I asked you about post-Olympics, whether or not we've seen the aggression of China against Taiwan, we've seen crackdowns going on in Hong Kong, COVID-19, talk of reunification, fighter jets flying over Taiwan airspace. Do you anticipate that the communist Chinese are watching this very closely, and that this will be their green light to move forward with their territorial ambitions? And lastly, the other part of the equation is Biden and Iran on the verge of resuming these failed Obama nuclear deal talks. Those are the two other big news items of the day in terms of foreign policy.
We shouldn't lose sight of either of those. They're certainly watching how America and the West responds to what Vladimir Putin will do. We talked about what might happen after the Olympics. We hit it within a few hours, Sean, when we spoke last.
Yep.
Right? The Olympics ended yesterday. The deal that's about to be struck in Iran is going to make Israel have to make a really hard decision. It puts them at risk. Our Arab friends in the Gulf, they're watching this, and they don't think America will have their back either. We built out the Abraham Accords on a theory that says America will be with you. We'll help you. You're ready to defend yourself. We'll do the right thing by you. And then, of course, Xi Jinping is watching this too. Taiwan's a little more complicated. Going to get the chance to go there in just a few days. We need to do all that we can to protect our way of life here at home, and allowing these thugs, these autocrats, these dictators to move around the cabin freely is not in America's best interest.
Well, I know you moved your schedule around to be with us today. We really appreciate it. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Have a good evening, sir.